She's deep in the forest. She's nocking her arrow. She's aiming it. She's tightening the bow. We know this is a book about children killing each other. She aims it very carefully right towards the eye. And then we find out it's a bird she's hunting.
A lot of authors, when interviewed, will say that if they submitted their best selling book of 10 plus years ago today, it probably wouldn't sell because the market has changed. And I find that so fascinating to think about how different stories would do better or worse depending on when they're published and kind of how they're written and where they start. So, hi, I'm Nicole Wilbur. I'm a writer. I write YA novels and I think out loud about story here on my YouTube channel. And today, we are going to brainstorm alternative openings to the Hunger Games to quote unquote fix it for 2026. Obviously, the Hunger Games does not need to be fixed. It's great, but it's fun to think about. I think it's also really useful to do this exercise to illustrate how many possibilities there are for an opening scene, how many possibilities there are for any book, really, and to talk about certain trends I've noticed in the market in 2026. The opening of the Hunger Games does one thing, some things, really, really well, but other things arguably not as well. And there's always trade offs, no matter what opening you're writing, in terms of who you want to appeal to. So, without further ado, let's look at the Hunger Games. I was really surprised when I went back and realized that the Hunger Games opens with Katniss waking up in her bed. Yes, she feels the bed next to her. She says there's a cold spot. That's normally where Prim is. She looks around the room. She realizes that Prim is with their mom. She sort of guesses maybe she had a nightmare, and that is because today is the day of the reaping. Of course, she had a nightmare. She walks through District 12, and this is where we get some world building. We see the seam, we see the coal miners, we see that people here are genuinely very poor. Then Katniss heads off into the forest, and this is the thing that we all remember from the movie, or at least I remember from the movie, where they're sitting and they have their bakery bread, and like she throws a blueberry in the air, and they mimic Effie, and they're like, "Happy Hunger Games, and may the odds be ever in your favor." Then they finally, maybe 3/4 of the way through the chapter at this point, they go to the square. They see people filing in. There's a somber mood. As they're filing in, Katniss has this huge exposition dump where she basically explains the whole history of Panam and the Hunger Games. It is triggered by someone giving a speech about that, but it is quite a big like exposition dump. And finally, in the very last line of the scene, Effie draws Prim's name. So we give Suzanne Collins all the credit here because that is a lot of stuff to cover in one single chapter. We get to the story problem, the catalyst, which is Prim's name being drawn and quickly Katniss volunteering for the Hunger Games, really fast. We get there at the end of chapter 1, and that's essential, especially in a 2026 market. Quickly to illustrate this point, a lot of executives, publishing people, agents, etc., still use the terminology in Save the Cat. This is not what most recent breakout books are doing. Specifically, that catalyst is not happening 8,000 words in. And Suzanne Collins really embraced that and brought that catalyst way, way forward. Let's look now, though, at where it could maybe be improved, depending on your taste and thinking of some of the trends around book writing in 2023. She starts the book waking up. Okay, right? Maybe it was less of a cliche in 2009, like because the Hunger Games did it. That could be the start of the cliche. You know what I mean? And Sunrise on the Reaping does it too. It starts with Haymitch waking up. I'm like, come on, guys, let's be more interesting. Other things, there is that big chunk of exposition that goes through the history of Pan Am right in the middle. We could do this in a different way that's less info dumpy and honestly trusting our reader a little bit. One of the things that's very common now in 2026, because people's attention spans are so hard to grab, we're competing with phones, with TikTok, with Instagram, with all of whatever it is that people are doing these days. before we have an emotional connection, which is hard to get in the first sentence, you can get people through curiosity, through suspense, and you can get them intellectually engaged. You try to get the reader basically being a detective from the very beginning. And then here's the other thing, turning up the pleasure elements. All right, I'm not about to say we should turn this into dystopian to see this romanpian dystopia romance. I'm trying to say dystopian romance, but it's true that when we're competing in 2026 with all of these different sources that give us all of this serotonin, we want to give our readers that same kind of serotonin and dopamine when they start reading our books. So leaning on things like gossip theory or pleasure buttons can be another great strategy for hooking readers in. Let's come up with some alternative opening scene ideas for the Hunger Games that can show the stakes of the Hunger Games and the fact that she's gonna die, like why we should be afraid for her, without that big exposition dump in the middle. You might have noticed I dressed to match Katniss today. I have the braid and the black shirt. No bow and arrow, but that's fine. So if we're thinking about opening moments, let's kind of work backwards. The first thing I think, and the closest one, would be instead of her waking up, we start with her, here's the vision, in the forest, and she's about to kill something. She's like aiming it with her bow and arrow. And because we know the promise of the premise, we know from the book's packaging that this is about kids hunting each other to the death. The first sentence could be reminiscent of that, ooh, she's about to kill something and we think it's a person. And then the third or fourth sentence, it's clear that it's a bird. It would skip basically like the first couple pages of the existing chapter and start right before she met up with Gale. Another idea that is sort of similar, starting the same day, same timeline, everything, but a little bit different, would be to actually start with Madge and to expand that scene out a little bit. Now, my taste in opening scenes is I want something that feels very sharp, very pointed, and that comes to like a T, right? With that T being often a decision that the character is going to make. Why I like the idea of starting with Madge is it's kind of an emotional entryway. We can all relate to sort of a difficult social situation. And I hate the movie took this out, but it's such a key part of understanding how the districts are kept in oppression. And it's a really good illustration of just like what a bad spot they're in. And they talk about, oh, you won't be going to the Capitol, it won't be your name called, which gives a lot of those sort of suspense questions and curiosity seeds that it basically could accomplish if it was expanded, the same thing that the little drops of the reaping do in the beginning. And I think her interiority around Madge is already very good, but could even be more interesting, especially as we know that Madge's mom was Katniss's mom's friend. Maybe I've always been fascinated by that, so I'm like, we can get more of Madge. But that could be a good place to start as well. This is my taste, but having Katniss go through so many different areas, it feels very like exploratory until we get to that point at the end, which is Prim's name being called. But I almost wish she had a more like active, confirmed, poignant goal. So on that realm, I started thinking, okay, what could be a like goal that she could have where she could either accomplish it or not by the end of the scene? What if Katniss and Gale are hunting together? We could start with this one and then go here, and they emerge from the fence and they're like seen by a peacekeeper, and then that gives her the goal throughout the whole time in the square of not being seen by the peacekeeper. I'm playing too with like recentering her expectation to create more surprise. There's obviously only so much you can do this because we know she's going to the Hunger Games. That's the book. But if we build up the character's expectation on something else, we can create more surprise. We could give her something else to kind of focus on and have the name really come more out of the blue, you know? So if she is in the square, she's desperate that the peacekeeper not recognize her. She's like ducking or trying to leave or trying to like do something in the square. And then Prim's name is called. Kind of along that idea is this one here. I was really, look at this picture on the side of the check-in, and that really captured my imagination. I don't think that actually happens in the book, but I found this moment that's still really intriguing what if you had something where she's having an issue with her check-in, like they can't find her name, or I don't know, she her fingerprint is messed up and not matching. And as she's trying to deal with this and she's just trying to get in the square to stand next to her sister or to stand next to Gail or whatever that goal is, she's trying to deal with these administrators, and Gail tries to help and he's sent along, and Madge tries to help and he's sent along, and there's potential for peacekeepers to kind of come in here and be like, no, leave her, go away. She could get led over to a separate area. She could be kind of held off. Maybe they give her a choice, like you could do X or Y, and she's finally like, okay, fine, I'll find Prim later, I'll find my mom later. And then she hears Prim's name's called. Why do I like this? I guess it's kind of just going into that whole, like, can we make it as central and pointed as possible? Again, that's very much my taste. Another idea, this is really fun. I really suggest you do this for yourself. I'm having so much fun brainstorming. We talked about pleasure buttons, right? So pleasure would be something like danger. That's really this one coming in here. It's safe danger. That's the pleasure button, by the way, not danger itself. But anything we read in a book is safe danger. That's what this one's really playing into, that danger. This one's kind of playing into danger. It's playing into power dynamics, power and status. This one is power and status again. That's another pleasure button. Another pleasure button, obviously, is touch. I'm like, what if we messed the story up? What if we had Katniss and Gale already dating? I'm sure Suzanne Collins debated this and was like, no, they are not together. They have never had a romantic relationship, blah, blah, blah. But what if they did? What if we pulled a selection and we started with them making out? That's a pleasure button. It's touch. And then a peacekeeper finds them. Ooh, because they're breaking the rules, because they're not supposed to be there. There's your danger pleasure button. And they think that they're going to get in so much trouble and, whipped or something. I don't know what they specifically think, but she has a specific expectation of, oh no, this is going to be really bad. But he ends up being lenient. He says, okay, go home, get ready. And she's like, whew, we got away with it. And then he says something like, you rats or whatever, like, you deserve to hear your name called today. And we could end that scene there and then start in the new scene where we're getting home to get ready and going to the square. I kind of like that because then we have a really active curiosity seed. Their name's getting called. What does that mean? And you could almost work into a little bit of like, this guy is from the capital. He's a little bit like old guard. He could say something, it's people like you who got District 13 killed. Like, I hope that your names come up. Something like that. Like something really awful that this man could say to these teenagers. If we think a little bit outside of it, so a lot of advice is for openings is start on the day that something is different, something changes. What if we didn't? What if we started on a different day? And when I'm thinking of starting on a different day, I would not change the number of pages before we get to Prim's name being read. That's very important. We need to get to that catalyst as soon as we can. But there could be some potential other active ways to set it up. So my first thought was, what if we started with Katniss at school? You have the potential to put in a bit with Peeta here, and maybe people are talking about the Hunger Games and being like, who won't be here on Monday? So terrible, so bad. And maybe she goes in and she breaks it up. And then I thought, Katniss wouldn't do that. She wouldn't go in and like break up some sort of like fight like that for somebody. She just kind of put her head down and she would go about her business. So that would be a cool thing to see as well. Her being like, not getting involved. These guys are idiots, but I can't say anything because if I tell them they're being idiots, then I could put myself in danger. That could be interesting world building. My next thought was, okay, who would she protect? I was like, well, she could be picking Prim up at school. That's even more poignant if you have these 12-year-olds being like, are you not going to be here on Monday? Are you going to get killed? Like, all awful. And she could step in to stick up for Prim. Even better, potentially, could be framing Gale, right? Because if we were sticking up for Prim, if the Prim thing was happening, it was highlighting that her name could be picked, that might be giving away the goose a little bit too much. Prim's name is going to be picked, so we don't want to set up an expectation that her name could be picked. We want that to be a surprise. So a better kind of red herring here might be Gale. So she's meeting Gale to hunt, but Gale's talking to people his own age, and people are placing bets. And like, there's a ton of money going on Gale for being picked as tribute because they've kind of done an informal survey and figured out that his name is in the reaping way more than anybody else's, at least in this group. And so they're like, people are putting a lot of money on his name getting chosen. And she feels sick. She's like freaking out. This is awful. And so she goes in, kind of like sticks up for him briefly, and they go off into the woods, have a little chat, whatever it is, maybe kiss, ooh, more pleasure, and go on with their lives. And then that would be one short scene, and then next short scene, cut to helping Prim dress and going into the square. I kind of really like that one. I think if I was to write this book that's already written, that's already amazing, that doesn't need my input at all, I would maybe do that one. And so then I'm thinking, okay, we're thinking like it's not the day of the reaping. What if we got even more crazy? What if we, put in a prologue? Ah! And so my thought was, if we really want to show, I was honing in on that exposition of like these 12, 24 tributes go into the arena and only one comes out, etc. How that's shown in exposition. I'm like, how could we show that? Show that. Could we show, not tell that in scene? And how could we really like make the stakes clear without spelling it out? And my thought was, okay, well, she's seen other Hunger Games. So what if we had a prologue? A prologue, people define these differently. In my course, I define it as basically a scene that's the first scene that is either outside of timeline or from a perspective that we haven't met before and we aren't going to see for the rest of the story. So the reason why prologues are so cool is because you can do things in a prologue that you can't do for the rest of your book, because it sends a signal to the reader that's like, hey, this is not how the book's actually going to go. And that can be really bad because it can create disruptions for the reader and it can be hard to get pulled back into chapter 1 after a prologue. But it can also do really cool things for us. Katniss could be selling in the seam at the close a year ago, at the close of the 73rd Hunger Games, and there's commotion. The last tribute from District 12 has just been killed. The family loses it. They start a riot. They're making trouble. And then she like runs off to rescue Prim and her mom. And then we go first scene being the reaping, whatever combination of things we want to get into. I like that one. I like that idea because I like the idea of showing the grief of another family and showing what really happens when someone is killed in a district. We never really get to see that in the books because Katniss is in the games, not in the district. And I think that would be really interesting as a fan. You could put Gail in there somewhere. And it makes it very active, right? So then when she's pulled, we've already seen what it's like when someone dies, and we have that dread built in without needing exposition. And then my other idea, very similar to that, is again with the 73rd Hunger Games. Maybe we have a brief look at the victors from the 73rd Hunger Games. It could be from Katniss's perspective, it could be from someone else's, and it could be like a description and then very, very short. You know, we're talking like a couple paragraphs here of them, and then it's some like amazing sentence that's like, and they only had to kill 23 people to get here. You know, something like that. And then we again go and we meet Katniss, and that could be from her perspective, or it could be omniscient, or we could like go to the game maker. Maybe I'm just like a nerd and crazy, but it's very, very exciting to think of all of the possibilities in a book, and it's fun to do this with our favorite stories. But it's also fun to do this for our own books. We feel like we've landed on like the best beginning, and that's the way it must start. But if we take a step back, and granted, it's much easier to do this for other people's stories than it is for our own, we can come up with tons and tons of alternatives. And often when we're in this brainstorming phase, we can come up with something that we like even more than what we originally have. So if you love talking about beginnings and how to create the strongest beginning possible, I have a course called Don't Skip My Prologue. It's $24. It comes with an opening checklist to self-evaluate your story, a great database of novel openings. There's tons of examples where we do analyses just like this, looking at all of the elements that you need to sell readers on your story in the first few pages of your book. We talk about decision, expectation, micro and macro suspense. We talk about prologues, obviously. We talk about story timeline. We talk about gaining trust. And there's all sorts of like little tips, hacks, common mistakes to avoid and stuff. Goodness in there. You can check it out at the link below. I also did an analysis of The Calamity Club, which is a book, on my Substack this week, which will also be linked below. There's tons more storytelling adventures to check out. That one's free, the Substack one, if you want to take a look, to be found on my YouTube and my Substack. So make sure you subscribe, check the links below, and hang around for a while. I'm Nicole Wilbur. Thank you so much for watching. And please do tell me in the comments if you liked any of these, if you're like, you suck, the original beginning, the actual beginning of the Hunger Games is the only one that should ever be considered, or if you have other ideas for how a book like this could start. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.